Like most words that become popular, the word resilience carries fraught associations. And in today's world of gloom and doomsayers, it may bring to mind negative ideas like preppers or militants. But if you strip away the politics, resilience simply means taking personal responsibility for your future health, your future happiness, safety, opportunity, and even spirituality in a leave no stones unturned kind of way. I'm an animist, so I believe that this is a sacred responsibility, and that perhaps it's also an opportunity to bring ourselves into better relationship with the world around us. The things you consume determine the quality and texture of your life, your food, water, medicine, and so on. Anything you bring into your field has effects on you, and usually one of those effects is to make you consume more of that thing. Everything justifies its own necessity. And we're naturally habitual creatures, and we develop affinities very easily for our favorite things, so much so that we even begin to identify with those things. In this bottled and packaged world of today, we primarily consume products that are made for the sole purpose of generating profit, and the premise of this episode is that this profit orientation makes these products fundamentally untrustworthy and, in fact, dangerous both to our physical and our spiritual well-being. Welcome to the second episode of Postmugglism, the podcast that talks about magic in the postmodern age, how to thrive in decline, how to grow in the cracks, and how to enchant your way to a better life and a more magical future. Thanks for listening, or watching if you're on YouTube. If you enjoy this episode, consider subscribing so that you get notified when new episodes come out each week. Last week's episode waxed nostalgic about the magical lifeways of our ancient past. This week, we're staying with the mundane troubles of the current day, looking at them through a magical perspective. For most of human history, we ate food made, at least partially, from the fruits of our own labors, or the labors of our close neighbors. We knew the source of our food and the manner in which it was grown, harvested, and prepared, at least generally speaking. In contrast, modern globalism has severed the bonds between consumer and consumed, leaving only consumerism. The act of consuming something and taking its energy into your field is sacred, and consumerism corrupts this act by rendering us blind to exactly what it is that we're consuming, both in terms of the ingredients, obviously, but also in the process and manner in which it's produced. The manner in which items are produced translates directly to their efficacy. Products work better when they're made with love. Food is better for you when it's grown and prepared with love. And consumerism blinds us to the sacredness of our supply chain. Developing an awareness of our relationship to the things that we consume ensures that we prioritize, protect, and steward those resources with a careful eye on the future. In contrast, our modern global society has broken down all of these local connections so that they can be monetized and monopolized at scale. And the commoditization of nature's gifts as valuable resources has corrupted these sacred processes of stewardship into simple, soulless industrial extraction, with little to no concern for the future. When you can't see nature's generosity as anything more than financial opportunity, the sacred connections between consumable and consumer are broken. Eating and drinking are sacred acts. Surviving and thriving are sacred responsibilities, and they must be managed regeneratively to perpetuate ourselves and the world we inhabit into the future. Taken to its natural extremes, our extractive worldview yields zero-sum thinking, haves and have-nots, hegemony, dominator culture, feudalism, and slavery in all its many forms. But this isn't the only way to be. It's just the way that's most profitable for the investor class. Humanity will eventually learn the benefits of collaboration over competition, of caring for one another genuinely. But we're not there yet as a species. Until then, there's no way to safely consume products that are made by companies with shareholders. Small and private businesses sometimes genuinely care about the quality of their product, but they don't know what they don't know, and you can be exposed because a business that you trust unwittingly trusts the central supply chain, like everybody else does. It's tough to be rigid about this. I don't eat out much, and I definitely don't buy any packaged goods. I prepare 2 to 3 meals every day. We buy from regional, organic producers of meat, eggs, dairy, veggies, and fruit. A lovely couple at the Wednesday market makes some incredible whole wheat organic bread, so we buy that now. Our medicinal products are mostly local, and they're mostly herbs. Sometimes, though, we have to take Advil when we have a really bad headache. Not often, but sometimes. We don't have our homestead yet, so our food is purchased rather than grown or raised. That's a work in progress. We don't have a well yet either, so we still buy water. And we stock up on what we can't produce ourselves, just in case, but I would hardly call us regenerative or sustainable. But this isn't about perfection. It's about reducing exposure and mitigating risk. It's also about our relationality to the resources that we consume, about our responsibilities in relationship to them. And that's not some burden or obligation that we're forced to bear because of climate responsibility or whatever. These are just sacred acts that perpetuate life. It's impossible not to engage with them in respect and gratitude when you're personally invested into their quality, where they come from, and what kind of energy they've collected on their way to you. Even more so for those things that you grow and raise. Investing into them before ingesting them into your body is the very essence of right relationship. Resilience is simply a brand name for this holistic and spiritually aware approach to personal resource management. And why not? Taking personal responsibility for sourcing or producing the resources you consume ensures physical resilience and improves your health along the way. Becoming more aware of the relationships which provide these resources increases your respect for them and for the environment which makes those relationships possible. There are many reasons to prepare for a future where resources are scarce, and still plenty of reason to hope in spite of all of it. Resilience isn't about doom and gloom. That's prepping. It's about taking responsibility for maintaining a high quality of life despite living in interesting times, and doing so in right relationship with the world around you. In this episode, I'll go over evidence that food from the central supply chain, that's grocery stores and so on, is essentially poison, and talk about how it negatively affects your body, mind, and spirit. I'll also discuss the highly marketed food substitution products that are increasingly popular, and how one big corporation in particular is dangerously successful at manipulating and monopolizing the global food market. And I'll share some of my own family's experiences in taking responsibility for our personal supply chain and some of our plans for the future as well. Everything you eat or use has to come from somewhere. As magicians, we have to be open to the idea that both the place of origin and the process of creation imbue products, for the lack of a better word, with energy that can be transmitted to or absorbed by the recipients or users. Certainly that's true of magical objects, right? So why not our food, drink, and personal care items? We prize handcrafted materials, praising objects made with love and attention to detail, or one might say, intention. And of course we do, because they're objectively superior, even if that's difficult to justify in purely rational terms. It's not just about bad energy either. The majority of mass-produced consumer products are downright toxic, poisonous. They're bad for you, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And this isn't a conspiracy theory rant either. This is well-documented, if not well-publicized, fact. The most egregious example of this is probably the infamous glyphosate, one of the active ingredients in Roundup, which is sprayed on growing fields around the world religiously by modern farmers, who are increasingly forced to do so by the manufacturer, Monsanto's, shady and monopolistic practices. The 20-year history of Roundup and Roundup-ready genetically engineered crops is the stuff of conspiracy thrillers. Roundup was introduced to combat weeds in large-scale farming operations, and it was sprayed so liberally that it caused widespread damage to crops on adjacent farms. Then Roundup-ready crops, which are impervious to Roundup, were introduced and marketed to the very farmers whose crops were damaged, essentially forcing them to buy subscriptions to seed, pesticide, and fertilizer packages offered exclusively by Monsanto, who destroyed their fields in the first place. Worse yet, glyphosate, as well as its modern replacement, dicamba, is highly toxic and carcinogenic. Reading now. In August 2018, a California court ruled that glyphosate-based pesticides contributed to an American citizen's cancer and that Monsanto knowingly covered up the risks. This case was the first of over 5,000 lawsuits on this matter to go to trial in the U.S. The court case revealed documents that show Monsanto manipulated scientific research and downplayed the cancer risk of its products for decades. Monsanto also negotiated directly with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to downplay the agency's cancer risk assessment, and the EPA went out of its way to gain approval for Monsanto. In Canada, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, a Department of Health Canada, worked cooperatively with the EPA in Canada's evaluation of glyphosate, choosing to reauthorize glyphosate in Canada for another 15 years. And this is from a report by Ecaterre titled, "What's in Your Lunch? How a Harmful Weed Killer Finds Its Way into Your Children's Food." Likewise, glyphosate has been labeled a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. Quoting from an article on mygenefood.com, which is linked in the show notes, in one statement of concern published in the Journal of Environmental Toxicology in 2016, the authors noted that products containing glyphosate often contaminate drinking water sources, precipitation, and air, especially in agricultural regions. That the half-life of glyphosate in water and soil is longer than previously recognized. Glyphosate and its metabolites are widely present in the global soybean supply, and that human exposures to GBHs are rising. Worse yet, beyond the toxic effects on the body, glyphosate also makes the food that we grow less nutritious. Reading from the same article again. Organic soybeans, for instance, have been found to have a higher nutritional value than genetically modified soybeans. There's also speculation that the cholesterol-lowering beta-glucans in oats, which only emerge shortly before the plant ripens naturally, may be lower in crops that are forced to ripen early. Some companies worried about nutrient levels, such as Grain Millers Incorporated, one of the largest oat buyers in Western Canada, have even gone so far as to state that they will no longer purchase oats treated with the pre-harvest glyphosate. It's from 2016. So it's understood by major food producers that glyphosate is an issue, but if you go searching for this information in Google, you'll find mostly websites arguing strongly that glyphosate is not carcinogenic. This has the fishy smell of corruption and collusion because the human evidence is indisputable, and some countries, including Mexico, have even banned its use entirely. But is this kind of whitewashing so unbelievable from a company so notorious that The Guardian reported them as raising eyebrows by obtaining a ban preventing attorneys for the plaintiffs from presenting information regarded to its alleged influence on research? Suspect, certainly. But how many products that we consume actually contain glyphosate? How big of a problem is this? Well, it's difficult to say exactly because they'd each have to be individually tested. But the list of products that have been shown to contain the carcinogenic weed killer is alarmingly broad. Glyphosate has been found in products like Ben & Jerry's ice cream, non-organic cotton products like tampons and clothing, and even drinking water. It's been found in 75% of air and rain samples, and according to a 2017 study, it's regularly found in human urine. So it's in everything. A hideously poisonous chemical is embedded in so many of the products that we consume. It's coming out in our pee. And while glyphosate is certainly the most obvious example of this industrial profit-over-everything model of late-stage capitalism at work in our supply chain, it's hardly the only one. Processed sugars and sugar substitutes are just as poisonous and popular. Seed oils is another unpleasant rabbit hole to fall into. There are so many examples, actually, that the list of ways our food is trying to kill us is too long to sum up in a single episode. But seed oils are just too good of an example to pass up. Industrially produced seed oils are used in salad dressings, marinades, cheeses, and many other food products. They're in nearly everything. In fact, a report from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in 2018 identifies so-called vegetable oils as the fastest growing subsector of global agriculture. But these oils are a health crisis waiting to happen. Zero Acre, an organization which campaigns against the use of seed oils, has compiled some very dense resources on this topic with lots of great resources in the footnotes. In one of their articles on the subject, they described the manufacturing process for seed oils like this. In many cases, synthetic antioxidants are added in an attempt to preserve the shelf life of the unstable fats and seed oils. These synthetic antioxidants, like TBHQ, BHA, or BHT, are known carcinogens. Here is the step-by-step process of making most seed oils. Seed oils are gathered from plants such as corn, soybean, safflower, sunflower, rapeseed, and so on. Unfortunately, more land is devoted to vegetable oil crops than to all vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, roots, and tubers combined, resulting in record rates of deforestation, which is a leading driver of climate change. The seeds are heated to extremely high temperatures, causing oxidative damage and transforming some of the PUFAs into damaging trans fats. The seeds are then extracted with a chemical solvent, such as hexane, which allows for a more optimal yield. Next, the seeds go through the process of high-heat deodorization, which may further damage the unstable PUFAs and increase the production of trans fats once again. Finally, chemical preservatives are sometimes added to enhance the shelf-life of the oils, including the carcinogenic compounds BHT and BHA. In short, toxic chemicals manufactured in industrial processes with chemical solvents and carcinogenic preservatives are used to make essentially all of your food. If you want to live a healthy life, you have no alternative but to abandon the central supply chain, to avoid grocery stores and mass-produced foods and goods as much as possible. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Postmugglism. Putting this project out into the world has been a real journey, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it with you. A few years ago, the idea of being a full-time wizard was too hard to believe, but I'm really grateful that this is my life now. If you don't know, I write and produce content about magic, obviously, but I also work as a shamanic energy healer, seeing clients via Zoom all over the world. If you're feeling stuck or directionless, dealing with old trauma or grief, or living with chronic aches or illness, I'm available to provide support on your healing journey. My 90-minute sessions start with a consultation and then move into a healing ceremony where I clear your chakras, break up energetic blocks, and help you release the toxic energy that's causing imbalance and distress in your mind, body, and spirit. To find out more about shamanic healing or my practice, please visit www.sacredserpent.co or hit me up on social media with any of your questions. Buying fresh, raw meat and vegetables, preparing all your sauces, dressings, etc. yourself using only healthy oils like coconut or olive oil, if you're not heating it, and animal fats, aka butter or lard, means that your food is chemically clean, it tastes better, and it's going to provide more nutritional value. And it's through this lens that I view veganism, impossible meat, bug burgers, and other diet/climate hysteria. Don't get me wrong, the industrial meat industry is a shit show, and our environmental crisis is self-evident. But the number of greedy hands in ESG investing in so-called clean and sustainable foods is enough reason not to trust these technocratic solutions or their corporate sponsors. But then there's also the evidence. Reading from a 2019 report commissioned by GMO Science. The Impossible Burger is a plant-based burger, the key ingredient of which is a protein called SLH, derived from genetically modified yeast. A rat feeding study commissioned by the manufacturer, Impossible Foods, found that rats fed SLH developed unexplained changes in weight gain, changes in the blood that can indicate the onset of inflammation or kidney disease, and possible signs of anemia. Impossible Foods dismissed these statistically significant effects as non-adverse, or as having no toxicological relevance. The company's conclusion of safety is unsound due to the short duration of the feeding study and the small number of animals used. They did research and then just wrote off the parts they didn't like and took their product to market on a lie. This is science for sale, and it's dangerous. A study from 2021 claims that there are fewer digestible amino acids in plant-based Impossible and Beyond Meat burgers than in pork or beef versions, and amino acids are particularly important for the development of the brain during childhood. So I can't wait till all this Beyond bullshit is served in school cafeterias. And veganism, well, like it or not, there's evidence that omnivorous diets are much, much better for the average person. When it comes to diet, of course, there are no absolutes and everybody has unique needs. But on the whole, a diet that prioritizes animal fats is healthier than one that doesn't. Dr. James O'Keefe, director of preventative cardiology at St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute, published a comprehensive review of vegan diets in the medical journal Progress in Cardiovascular Diseases, and an article on St. Luke's website summarizes it by saying, compared to the standard American diet of highly processed, low-fiber, high-calorie, sugary foods, vegan diets have some health advantages. However, researchers found that avoiding all animal foods may lead to nutritional deficiencies in vitamin B12, omega-3, calcium, zinc, iron, magnesium, and high-quality protein. These deficiencies may be associated with increased risk for certain types of cancer, stroke, bone fractures, preterm birth, and failure to thrive. Avoiding consumption of animal-sourced food may also be related to higher rates of depression and anxiety. Hair loss, weak bones, muscle wasting, skin rashes, hypothyroidism, and anemia are other issues that have been observed in those strictly following a vegan diet. Dr. O'Keefe is quoted as saying, "As fundamental as diet is to health, you need to keep in mind the diet for which we've been adapted genetically. Animal-based foods have been an important part of the human diet for at least 3 million years. Eliminating all animal foods would be like deciding you're going to feed a tiger tofu and expecting that it's going to be healthy. If you want an organism to thrive, you should feed it the diet for which it's been genetically adapted via evolution down through the ages." Well put, which raises the question, why can't we just eat how our species has always eaten? The idea of food resilience, of growing and raising your own food or acquiring it through personal, local connections, is hardly new. Victory gardens were promoted to American households during the Second World War, i.e., the kind of garden you raise at home to be more resilient for the war effort. It's only been within a few generations that this idea has fallen out of favor with Westerners, and that's due to our increasingly global aspirations for industry and commerce, which is to say, modern imperialism. Massive corporations shape politics to allow the monopolization of resource production and trade, squeezing the average person for the very resources they need to survive. Why is there so much so-called science and so much political and social support for things that we know are bad for us, like plant-based foods, veganism, and so on? Because fake food is more profitable, even if it's not actually sustainable or nutritious. Because Bayer, a leading pharmaceutical brand, merged with Monsanto, the world's largest agricultural company, and will simply invent pharmacological interventions to sell you for all the problems that their pesticides, GMO foods, and other industrial food products will cause. These companies sponsor self-serving science to validate hooking you into intractable systems of control via your most essential resources, food, medicine, and so on. And it goes deeper than the food products and commodities. Bayer, Monsanto, and other companies are abusing the patent process to monopolize access to the literal DNA of our food supply, restricting access to seeds and tampering with their basic genetic structures. German media company Deutsche Welle reported in 2021 that today 4 corporations, Bayer, Corteva, ChemChina, and Limagrain, control more than 50% of the world's seeds. These staggering monopolies dominate the global food supply, and seeds themselves are becoming less diverse. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Association, 75% of the world's crop varieties disappeared between 1900 and 2000. I was shocked and devastated to learn recently that I've never seen a real banana. And I live in the tropics, and I eat a lot of bananas. You may be similarly shocked to learn that the odds that you've ever consumed a real banana are just as low. Likewise for a real ear of corn. Most likely you've never even seen such a thing. GMO products have been around long enough now that corporations like Monsanto have managed to force many of the original heirloom species to the brink of extinction. Their end goal is agriculture as a service, that is, by subscription. They rent crop genetics to farmers who are economically and contractually forced to produce monocrops of genetically modified corn, soybeans, and so on, products which are then creatively employed to make the packaged food goods which Westerners have become so heavily dependent on. Farmers are further contractually obligated to use Monsanto's patented pesticides and fertilizers, which poison the environment, kill pollinators, leach chemicals into our water supply, and cause all kinds of other problems. Downstream from that, chemical-laden pseudo-foods with low nutrient density and deadly side effects are force-fed to unwitting populations as healthy, sustainable alternatives to these dirty natural solutions. This is impossible to comprehend from an animist perspective. Nature provides everything essential to our survival in delicate balance that only need be stewarded to ensure that the demands of the future are met. I can't fathom trading our freedom and the lifeways that have supported us for millions of years for the technocratic tyranny that this plant-based GMO future implies. And as a magician, I can't accept the dead materialist worldview that makes all of this transhumanist madness seem necessary. It feels like a historical turning point, a tipping point. Enough people are learning that their very survival has been deprioritized and commoditized, that the misery of the many generates gains for the very, very few. But we haven't yet taken that big step collectively to become personally responsible for our food, our health, our quality of life, etc. Most of us are content to complain about it, but haven't made major changes yet to exit the system. Some of us are in the process of doing so now, and believe me, we wish we had more time. Unless the vast majority of humans decide to take control of their food supply by producing their own food or acquiring it through local connections with like-minded people, our food and nourishment will become a subscription service to a monopolistic provider that doesn't care at all about our well-being. Not in 50 years, not in 10 years even, but presently. So far I've focused on the physical, material harms of this extractive, monopolistic, and let's call it for what it is, imperialistic system causes. But as magicians, we should also be very concerned about the energetic and spiritual implications. When we think about our diet, we think about its effect on our energy level and our health, but we don't often think about its effect on our mental health, cognitive abilities, and our connection to spirit. From a magical perspective, where food comes from and how it's prepared imbues it with energy that you bring into your field when you consume it. This can be good or bad for you. Same goes for our cleaning and personal hygiene materials. It's better to use plants from your own garden in your food for the same reasons it's better to use them as materia in your rituals. The source and handling of the materia matters. Magicians today will debate the importance of wildcrafting their ritual materia and then eat food out of a box, and it just shows a massive disconnect in our worldview. The spirit of a place is embodied in some sense within anything from that place. And this is true of materia, of food, of medicine, and of people, of course. And the energy of everyone in the supply chain that you rely on affects the foods that you consume and their effects on the body. Optimally, we would own or influence every resource that we're dependent on, but optimal is very difficult to achieve. Instead, we have to prioritize where we focus our efforts to achieve the greatest resilience. But our food supply has to be at the very top of that short list of priorities. In times of war, famine, and other misfortune, your fortunes are often determined by your access to food and water alone. When food quality declines, so does productivity, health, cognitive ability, etc. These are essential qualities we have to protect at all costs. To survive and thrive, to flourish at a time like this, requires denying the zero-sum thinking of materialist rationalism and employing the irrational optimism that, though we can't see it yet, our salvation lies in finding our way back into right relationship. Food as an aspect of personal sovereignty is an essential part of this alignment. By managing our own supply chain, rather than using the one that is provided by society, we re-enter into gratitude for our nourishment and care, appreciation for where it comes from, and relationship with the network of providers which make it possible. It's very difficult to live 100% this way today, but very easy to get started down this path, with independent and local off-the-books providers steadily increasing in number. Demand creates supply, so we can expect to see more independence come online in the next few years as the central supply chain suffers increasingly worse disruptions during that time. Regardless of which narrative you believe, all of the future scenarios on the table for the human race indicate food and water crises to come. This will be an issue for many globally, but your experience is what you make of it. Rise to the challenge and learn to grow and raise your own food, at least enough for your family, and maybe a little more. Beyond food, all the other aspects of life where we've become dependent on the central supply chain are also due for review. Cleaning, hygiene, skincare and makeup, medicine, even what we use to care for our pets, plants, and hell, even lawn care. We've been sold chemicals by chemical companies our whole lives, often without realizing it, that aren't necessary until you start to use them. All these products create dependencies which one way or another end up being little subscriptions that we have to continue to pay to enjoy our lives. This is unnecessary if you manage your own supply chain. And what resources you can't own and control, source or replace as you move into the future. Take stock honestly. Do the math and figure out what you live on, how to store it long term, how to acquire it in bulk, and locally or independently. This is not about perfection. It's about having enough resources, procuring the healthiest materials possible, and thinking ahead. You can't realistically produce everything, but the right question to ask yourself is, what can you realistically produce? In our case, as renters in a suburban environment in a small beach town along the Caribbean coast of Mexico, growing all of our food in our tiny little backyard isn't feasible. Neither is raising any animals like chickens or goats. We are trying to grow our own herbs here at the rental, but we're dependent on others for pretty much everything else in our supply chain. However, we're reliant on the grocery store and the central supply chain in general for none of it. Our beef, pork, and poultry is top grade, organic, grass-fed, free-range, etc., and gets delivered to our door once a week by a very entrepreneurial lady who's sourcing high-quality meat from across Mexico to cater to the growing organic meat consumers in our area. We also get wild-caught fish and even raw organic dog food like marrow bones and organ meats from this same woman. Our fruits and vegetables come from the corner store or another delivery service that specializes in local and organic producers. And we're extremely lucky to have found a raw dairy producer that supplies all of our milk, butter, cheese, and yogurt from a few hours away near Merida. The loaf of incredible whole grain organic bread we consume and use for offerings each week comes from an awesome hippie couple at the Wednesday market that Sarah is quickly turning into friends. Their goat cheese is excellent as well. Cleaning and personal hygiene products are still a work in progress. We no longer use sunscreen or any lotion at all, really, because coconut oil has been sufficient in both cases, since we cut out seed oils which dry out the skin and make it more susceptible to burning. We still use a little shampoo, and since the water is insanely hard and mineralized here, I have to use conditioner, but it's mostly coconut oil as well. In the future, we aim to replace these and all other cleaning products with biodegradable options that we can produce ourselves. Sarah's quite proud to say that she's weaned herself off of all her regular medication since moving to Mexico, and through changes in their diet, the dogs are also all med-free, except for the flea tick worm prevention pill, whatever, that they take every month. Diet, herbs, and energy medicine are now our primary tools of health. When we begin construction on our future homestead next year, I'll finally be able to begin creating garden spaces again, and a few months later, producing the vegetables that we consume. We'll plant fruit trees in the fall during the rainy season and begin producing the fruit that we eat in a year and a half or so for pineapples, banana, and papaya, 2 or 3 for citrus, and then longer for other fruits like mangoes. We'll have chickens, hopefully, before we even move in officially, and goats not long after that, certainly within the first year. We'll have fruits, veggies, eggs, dairy, and water from the well, which taps into the strata of cenotes and underground rivers beneath our feet. Meat and fish are somewhat impractical to produce ourselves given our location, but we could raise pigs and plan to have an ample supply of eggs. And as I've said, 100% self-reliance isn't really the point. The point is recognizing your dependencies and having a plan to sustain them regeneratively. We'll continue to buy regionally sourced meat and fish and various other consumables, like the bread when someone locally does a better job at producing it than we do. And there will still be some things that we rely on which can only be obtained through the central supply chain, like ink pens, pots and pans, clothes, and so on. But we're limiting the harm and the control that the central supply chain can impose on us by taking responsibility for every aspect of our lives that we practically can. Resilience as a mindset allows you to prioritize the most important aspects of life, like health, personal sovereignty, and so on, without compromising the quality of your experience of life. This is where the irrational hope comes in. I believe that regenerative practices are not only the solution to our physical problems, like the eco-crisis, but also our spiritual problems, disassociation, disconnection, and loss of direction. Prioritizing your resilience is prioritizing your health, autonomy, and your future opportunities as well. It's a mental framework that does a lot of heavy lifting across different areas of your life. Okay, that's good and all. Bad corporations make bad products. Better health equals a better quality of life, and that's really only possible by asserting autonomy and responsibility over your personal supply chain. Fair enough. But how does this relate to magic? Simply put, food is sacred. Medicine is sacred. Self-care is a sacred act. Consuming something isn't transactional, it's engagement. You're bringing energy into your field whenever you consume or apply or whatever, another thing. The separation dividing the mundane from the magical exists solely in our minds. The reality is that nothing is mundane and everything is magical. There are simply rote, basic, and inglorious things which we imagine to be too simple to be magical. However, many of these mundane aspects become quite miraculous upon closer inspection. Everything is magical. Everything is connected and meaningful. Everything should be done in right relationship. And this requires conscious awareness and engagement. Your supply chain is no different. In fact, it's essential. To steward the future, we have to safeguard our supply chain first, and this naturally requires coming into awareness of our intimate relationship with all of its many parts. Conceptually, this is a perpetual work in progress, of course, an ideal goal to strive for, but practically speaking, time is of the essence, and your family's immediate health and well-being is under immediate threat from the industrially produced foods and goods that you rely on for day-to-day life. Small changes add up to big changes, and every independent choice that you make is meaningful and empowering. So, all I can say is, resilience is like good protection magic. If nothing happens and your family is safe, happy, and healthy, it must be working. Thanks for listening or watching this episode of Postmugglism. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a friend the old-fashioned way. Tune in again next week for another episode of Postmugglism to indulge in a little more magical thinking and irrational optimism here at the end of the empire. Till next time, take care.